We're going to pick up on the dog attack story with Nainesh Kotak, a personal injury lawyer who's joining us on the line because many people have questions. Nainesh, we appreciate you making time for us today.
Thank you for having me, Reshmi.
So Nathan was mentioning there, too, that this child who was mauled by the dog had to go to hospital, a 12-year-old boy undergoing 7 hours of surgery. And the issue that is continuing this discussion is who should be responsible for what happens on a school playground. This story has many facets to it. Nainesh, how do you explain it?
It absolutely does. So a couple of statutes would come to the fore here. The first is the Dog Owners Liability Act. It's a provincial legislation, and it really puts strict liability. In other words, it doesn't matter if it's negligence or not, on the owner of the dog. And the owner is not just defined as someone who's sort of registered. It could be anyone who harbors that dog. So if the owner is identified, if the person who had control of that dog initially before it was let loose is identified, there would be strict liability and liability to pay for physical injuries, economic loss, psychological injuries as well. So far, my understanding is that this dog, sort of no adult showed up. In other words, this dog may have been with someone who might have left the scene or what have you. Makes it a little more complicated, and hopefully the police are really investigating that to ascertain who the actual owner is. But on top of that, the interesting facet here is we have the school board property where they say that, look, they don't allow dogs off leash on their property, but they acknowledge that this happens, particularly at this school, on a very regular basis. I think, for example, a dog trainer was doing training on the facility. So under the Occupiers Liability Act, there would be liability on the property occupied, which would be the school board, if they didn't take reasonable steps to secure, to make sure that the premises were safe. So in this situation, we have to look at what did they do or what did they fail to do. Now, they mentioned, I've seen in the media, so far that the trustee was saying, well, we know this is a problem and we're trying to address it. Well, the real question is if they were aware it was an issue that off-leash dogs were going to be on school property, when children are going to be playing there, certainly even after hours, they may play, there may be liability. What steps did they take? Was there some enforcement? Were police called? Were signs put up? Were parents notified that, hey, this is a potential problem? Be careful if you have your children coming to our school after hours to play. So looking at this on first glance, there may well, in fact, be liability on the school board itself for not keeping its own premises safe. We get it. Look, there's not a lot of green space in some city areas. And for the most part, most dog owners are responsible. But I think what we saw during the past few years of the pandemic, there's a lot, the dog ownership increased, and there were a number of inexperienced owners who sort of came into the picture as well, first-time owners. And at the end of the day, really, a dog is a dog. It's really the owner. It's your training, how you socialize that dog that's going to affect many outcomes. And this is obviously a very, very unfortunate outcome. And it's not the first time. I spoke to the media, I think, a couple of weeks back. There was a similar situation that happened in Ottawa as well. So these are not isolated incidents. They keep occurring.
And Nainesh, you would advise anyone with a pet to let their home insurance provider know that they have a pet?
Absolutely, and most dog owners would do that. Particularly, if you own your home, it's prudent. It won't change your premium very much, but you should let them know. But where it becomes an issue is where there's a tenant. So let's say you're a tenant and you have a dog. Many tenants, for some reason, don't get home insurance, and they should. Just for your own personal property or liability's sake, in case the landlord insurer doesn't cover it. But it potentially, if you're a tenant and you have a dog and you don't have insurance, you could be subject to personal liability. If it turns out you're the dog owner and there's damage caused to another a domestic animal or to a human being, you could be personally responsible. So be always prudent, even as a tenant. Get tenant insurance and make sure they're aware, the insurer's aware you have a dog. It doesn't cost much, really. It's a bit of prudence that's going to save a lot of a headache to people down the road for sure.
Yeah, I believe you. Just a quick question, Nainesh. If the owner of this dog, where a 12-year-old boy was mauled, isn't found, could the Occupiers Liability Act still stand against the school board? Could the school board be held accountable if no dog owner shows up?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
And even if the dog owner shows up, you'd have liability under the Dog Owners Liability Act, potentially also the Occupiers Liability Act for the school as well.
You could hold them
Now,
both accountable.
absolutely. You would. I mean, ultimately, it would be the dog owner's insurance that would probably be the ultimate payer. But what if they didn't have insurance, right? So
Right.
it'd be prudent to name the school as well. Another important thing to note: there are provincial offences that are listed in the Dog Owners Liability Act, whereby there could be the maximum penalty. If your dog bites someone and you didn't take proper control and you contravene the act, there could be a $10,000 fine or even up to 6 months in jail. So depending on the severity of the circumstance, obviously the dog's bitten before, if there were orders to muzzle and you didn't abide by them. So
you can get in a lot more trouble. Nainesh, I'm sorry, we're just up against traffic here. Nainesh Kotak joining us live on The Rush.